Shalom, brethren. Today we continue on our Genesis to Revelation studies. We are on the chapters of Judges, chapters 19 to 21, which will contain a controversial topic of woman, wife, and concubine, and the Hebrew word which has a numerical value of H802 that identifies the source of those three words. Note, of all the people, nations, etc. in the world, the Bible is only speaking of God's people and events that concern them. From Adam and Eve, then we went to Noah, Abraham, and then the formation of his nation Israel as it came out of Egypt. And then to the event below, Judges. We went after Moses was leading them, then Joshua, and now we're going on to Judges. The only time other people have come into the writings is when God's people interacted with them. Either went to war with them, or they married some of them, or so forth. Or they went into Egypt and then came out. Also, they are only mentioned, that's the other people, as far as they are relevant to the events of Israel history. So once they came out of Egypt, for example, we no longer heard about the Pharaoh there. We no longer hear about anything about Egypt, if they got over the plagues, if they rebuilt the country, or any of those kind of things. So bear this in mind all the way to Revelations, the end of the Bible. The prophecies yet to be fulfilled, and who gets the gifts of the Spirit when God makes prophecies through his prophets that he will send his gifts to certain people. So starting at chapter 19, verse 1. A story about a Levite and his concubine. It reads, "And it came to pass in those days when there was no king in Israel, that there was a certain Levite, sojourning, living, on the side of Mount Ephraim, who took to him a concubine." Now I'm just going to take you to the Strong's Concordance, or the Concordance, to show you this Hebrew word H802. So here you see the story and the Hebrew words that came from, and here's your word H02. And when you click on it, you see it says the first form is the feminine, and it goes a bit into it, and it has woman and wife, which come on to later on. Now I'm also going to take you to that same H02 in Genesis chapters 2, verses 23 and 24. Right, here we have in H02 is the word woman, the same one here, and then in Genesis verse 24 is the same H02 and its wife. So the same Hebrew word that in English is translated into woman, wife, and concubine. So that's the foundation of the understanding of this woman or this person. It's the same person, but it's just in English they've given it three different names to make you think she's changed status, but she hasn't really changed status. Now I'll also show you later on that a concubine is a wife, as we saw equivalent to a wife, but she's not the first wife. So Sarah, who married Abraham, will be called the wife, and any subsequent ones would be called concubines. So that's the difference between a wife and a concubine. So, returning to our story. He took him a concubine out of Bethlehem, Judah, and his concubine played the whore, notice that word, against him, and went away from him unto her father's house. Onto her father's house to Bethlehem, Judah, and was there 4 whole months. And her husband, so you see, she's called, the husband goes with a wife, arose and went after her to speak friendly unto her and to bring her again, having his servant with him and a couple of asses. And she brought him into her father's house. And when the father of the damsel saw him, he rejoiced to meet him. And his father-in-law. So a husband and a husband's wife has a father-in-law. And the damsel's father retained him, and he abode with him 3 days. So they did eat and drink and lodged there. Verse 5. And it came to pass in the 4th day, when they arose early in the morning, that he rose up to depart. And the damsel's father said unto his son-in-law. So we have all this terminology that talks about a husband-wife relationship. It says, note the word concubine, whore, husband, father of damsel being father-in-law. Man of a concubine being son-in-law. She explanation of the difference between a wife and concubine below, which I already showed you through the concordances. You may also remember from Genesis 2, chapters 2, verse 23 and 24, which I just showed you, that the same Hebrew word used for woman and wife. So continue from verse 12. And his master said unto him, we will not turn aside hither into the city of a stranger. So just continue the story. So they left their father-in-law and they're travelling back. And it's getting dark, and the servant says they should take shelter in another village. And he says, no, we will not do that. So that's where we're up to. And his master said unto him, we will not turn aside hither into the city of a stranger, that is not of the children of Israel. We will continue, basically. We'll pass over to Gilgal. So, stranger being description used for persons in non-Israel nations. And we see this in Acts chapters 2, verses 10, in the day of Pentecost, when all the people came from around all the Israelites came from around the other parts of the world to keep the feast of Pentecost. Acts chapter 2 verse 10 reads, from Phrygia and from Pamphylia and from Egypt, in the parts of Libya about Cyrene, and strangers of Rome, Jews and proselytes. So here both Jew and non-Jew are called strangers. In 1 Peter chapters 1 verses 1, it says, Peter, an apostle of Yeshua, the Messiah, to the strangers scattered throughout Pontus, Galatia, and he goes on. So when you are outside of Israel, even though you're a Jew, you are called a stranger, you're called a Gentile. So that's the difference. There are natural Gentiles of those countries, and there are Israelite Gentiles, Israelites living in those countries, who are called Gentiles by the ones in Jerusalem. So that's an understanding of stranger and Gentile. And I have in some places already shown you that the word stranger and Gentile is the same word, and so on. Okay, so where am I up to? Asia and Bithynia. So strangers scattered means they are originally from somewhere, Israel, else, but are now scattered to other nations, i.e. the lost tribes of Israel. James chapters 1 verse 1 speaks of the same group. James, a servant of God and of Yahweh, of Yeshua, to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad, greetings. So I hope we understand the context of stranger and Gentiles. Okay, continuing from Judges chapters 19 verse 22. Now as they were making their hearts merry, behold, the men of the city, certain sons of Beel, the devil, so they did turn into a certain village, beset the house round about, and beat at the door, and spoke to the master of the house, the old man, saying, bring forth the man that came into thine house, that we may know him. Of course, we know what know him means, just like when Abraham knew Sarah and so forth. And the man, the master of the house, went out unto them and said unto them, no, my brethren, nay, I pray you, do not so wickedly, seeing that this man is come into mine house. Do not do this foolish thing, basically, is folly. Behold, here is my daughter, a maid, and his concubine. Them I will bring out now, and humble them, and do with them what seemeth good unto you. But unto this man do no so vile a thing. So it's very clear that being homosexual as a gay is a vile thing, wicked. So Judges 19:25 continues, but the men would not hearken to him, so the man took his concubine. So the men would not hearken unto him, so the man took his concubine and brought her forth unto them. And they knew her and abused her all night until the morning. And when the day began to spring, they let her go. So if you read the whole story, she dies, basically, as she came in the morning, banging, knocking on the door. Found her dead. So the sons of Beel are servants of wickedness, unrighteous people of Satan. They wanted to lie with the men sexually, which is breach of Leviticus 20 verse 13. That says, if a man also lie with mankind, as he lieth with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. So on. So I assume there is a presumption that a man cannot be forced. Maybe he can defend himself, or should be able to defend himself. Deuteronomy 22 verse 25, that it is better for him to put up a fight and die, thereby saving his soul. So it is a wicked thing to do. Not sure what happened to the scriptures here. Matthew chapters 10 verse 28, and fear not them which can kill the body, but are able also to kill the soul. And fear not them which kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul, but rather fear him which is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. So now it's better for a man to lose his life and save his soul than to become gay or submit to being gay kind of thing. Deuteronomy 22:25. But if a man find a betrothed damsel in the field, and the man force her and lie with her, then the man only that lay with her shall die. 22:26. But unto the damsel thou shalt do nothing. There is in the damsel no sin worthy of death. For as when a man riseth against his neighbour and slayeth him, even so is this matter. For he found her in the field, and the betrothed damsel cried, and there was none to help save her. So in other words, the sentiments here is a man is much stronger than a woman, and she cannot put up much of a fight. But a man should be able to put up a bit of a fight. Continue the story, Judges chapters 20 verse 1, Israel's war with the tribe of Benjamin for what they've done basically. Right. Then all the children of Israel went out, and the congregation was gathered together as one man, from Dan even to Beersheba, with the land of Gilead, unto the Lord in Mizpeh. And the chief of all the people, even of all the tribes of Israel, presented themselves in the assembly of the people of God, 400,000 footmen that drew sword. You should read the story, but for those of you who don't, basically this man cut up his concubine wife, sent a piece to everyone, and said, whoever doesn't come to help me get vengeance, this is what will happen to them. So everyone from all the different tribes came together basically. So in verse 3, now the children of Benjamin heard that the children of Israel were gone up to Mizpeh. Then said the children of Israel, tell us, how was this wickedness? And the Levite, the husband of the woman, there you go, husband again, of the woman that was slain, answered and said, I came into Gibeah, that belongeth to Benjamin, and I and my concubine to lodge. And I took my concubine and cut her in pieces and sent her throughout all the country of the inheritance of Israel, for they have committed lewdness and folly in Israel. Verse 12. And the tribes of Israel sent men through all the tribes of Benjamin, saying, what wickedness is this that is done among you? Now therefore deliver us the men, the children of Beel, which are in Gibeah, that we may put them to death, and put away evil from Israel. But the children of Benjamin would not hearken to the voice of their brethren, the children of Israel. But the children of Benjamin gathered themselves together out of the cities unto Gibeah to go out to battle against the children of Israel. Verse 18. And the children of Israel arose and went up to the house of God and asked counsel of God. And he said, counsel God and said, which of us shall go up first to the battle against the children of Benjamin? And Yahweh said, Judah shall go first. Jump to verse 26. Then all the children of Israel and all the people went up and came unto the house of God and wept, because basically they lost the first battle, and sat there before Yahweh, and fasted that day until evening, and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before Yahweh. Verse 7. And the children of Israel inquired of Yahweh, for the ark of the covenant of God was there in those days. And Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, stood before it in those days, saying, Shall I yet again go out to battle against the children of Benjamin, my brother, or shall I cease? And Yahweh said, Go up, for tomorrow I will deliver them into thy hand. Verse 46. So they went and they won the battle on that day. So that all which fell that day of Benjamin were 25,000 men that drew sword. All these were men of valor. So in one battle we have 25,000 men died. Remember that number. We're going to use it later on. So my comment. If you read and total up how many men died in verses 21, it was 22,000. 25, it was 18,000. The verse 35 is 25,000. Verse 44 to 46, and so on. At least 65,000 men in one incident died. Now, assuming there's the same birth rate, proportion between men and women when they're born as babies, that leaves 65,000 more women than men. Either they and others, as men always being killed, are to remain single, or widows, or God in his wisdom made provision for their care to prevent them, these widows, taking other women's husbands away from her, or becoming immoral in seeking a husband. So what I'm saying is, let me finish off a sentence, by possibly having many boyfriends along the way. What I'm saying, when there's a surplus of women and a shortage of men, and man is not meant to be alone, women are not meant to be alone, the women will start seeking men, and the only place you're going to find a man sometimes is who's married to someone else. And they'll either take that other woman's husband or have affairs that they call cheating and so forth, and cause divorces and so on. Alternatively, the man will leave their older wife, or when she gets old, and move on to younger women. And basically we have a lot of problems if we do it the way that the world is doing it, rather than the way God has said it should be done. It becomes immorality and so on. I'm going to attach a video to, just a short 1-2 minutes video to this teaching that will explain a bit more. So reading the commandments of God, Exodus chapter 21 verse 10. If he, talking about a man, take him another wife, her food, her remnant, and her duty of marriage shall he not diminish. So God is saying that if a man has 2 wives, he should treat them equally. Deuteronomy 25 verse 5. If brethren dwell together and one of them die and have no child, the wife of the dead man shall not marry outside without unto a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go in unto her and take her to him to wife, and perform the duty of a husband's brother unto her. So that was one way instruction God put in, that these women, husbandless women, let's say those 65,000, are not left to become promiscuous or steal someone else's husband and all those kind of things. So God has set out regulations of how it should go. So in essence, this is the point. In God's way, when you marry a husband, the woman marries into the family. Because if that husband dies, a second husband is already chosen, or third, and so forth. And we should see this in the book of Ruth. When Ruth's husbands died, the next of kin was the one she was to marry, and it ended up with Boaz. Anyway, so I hope you get that point without me going into too much detail about it. Let's continue. See the attached video for a few consequences of going away from God's way of balancing the extra women with men, which I've said. One being that older wives will be left for younger ones by husbands, when men, if men are permitted only to have one wife. So note, God often speaks, another point is God often speaks of and makes provisions for widows, meaning the women without husbands, not widowers, i.e. men without wives, because there's always going to be a surplus of women for him to get a second wife or another wife. Okay, continuing, Judges 21 verse 1. Wives provided for the tribe of Benjamin. Now the men of Israel had sworn in Mizpeh, saying, there shall not any of us give his daughter unto Benjamin to wife. And the people came to the house of God, and abode there till evening before God, and lifted up their voices, and wept sore, and said, O Yahweh, God of Israel, why is this come to pass in Israel, that there should be today one tribe lacking in Israel? And it came to pass on the morrow that the people rose early and built there an altar and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. Verse 7. How shall we do for wives for them that remain, seeing we have sworn by Yahweh that we will not give them of our daughters to wives? And they said, what one is there of the tribes of Israel that came not up to Mizpeh to Yahweh? And behold, there came none to the camp from Jabesh-gilead to the assembly. So the people were numbered, and behold, there were none of the inhabitants of Jabesh-gilead there. And the congregation sent thither 12,000 men of the valiantest, and commanded them, saying, go and smite the inhabitants of Jabesh-gilead with the edge of the sword, with the women and the children. And this is the thing that we shall do. You shall utterly destroy every male and every woman that have lain with a man. And they found among the inhabitants of Jabesh-gilead 400 young virgins that had known no man by lying with any male. And they brought them unto the camp to Shiloh, which is the land of Canaan. So in simple words, when the husband of the concubine cut up his wife and sent them to different villages, tribes, and said, whoever does not come up, no, they will suffer the consequences. This Jabesh-gilead tribe did not come up, to help out with vengeance. So they said, well, how are we going to get wives for the men who survived for these men? So basically, they go out and kill all the men of this Jabesh-gilead village. So that means that village now had surplus women or virgins, and they took those to balance the books, you can say. Okay, so going on to Judges chapter 21 verse 18. However, we may not give them wives of our daughters, for the children of Israel have sworn, saying, cursed be he that giveth a wife to Benjamin. Then they said, behold, there is a feast of Yahweh in Shiloh yearly, in a place which is on the north side of Bethel, on the east side of the highway that goeth up from Bethel to Shechem, and on the south of Lebonah. Therefore they commanded the children of Benjamin, saying, go and lie in wait in the vineyards, and see and behold, if the daughters of Shiloh come out to dance in dances, then come out of the vineyards, and catch you every man his wife of the daughters of Shiloh, and go to the land of Benjamin. So I'm going to go a bit more into detail of concubines, because I know it makes a bit of controversy with people and messes up our understanding of how we get husbands and wives. And whilst I'm on this point, I'll just mention, I know many of Christians, men and women, are praying for God to send them a husband or a wife when they've been separated from their partners. And I'm not sure if that is something that God can do, because it would be breaking his own law. Because God says if the husband of a woman is still alive, that if she went on to another man, even though in our world terms she's divorced, that she's committing adultery. Yes, Yeshua said that. Yeshua also said that any man who marries her is committing adultery. So I don't think God would supply the woman with another husband under those circumstances whilst the husband is still alive, because it would in a sense be going against his own laws and help her commit adultery and her husband commit adultery. And that also applies to a man separated from his wife, on the ways that we have, the way the world runs it. He gets divorced from his wife, asks God, as a Christian man, is going to church and asking God to send him a partner. The only partner he should really be sent is a woman whose husband is dead, because that's the only person he's supposed to marry or take to be his wife. He should not be taking a woman whose husband is still alive, even though she's divorced. So if God was to answer his prayer and send him such a woman, or he thinks God has, it's actually going against God's own laws. And he will be committed adultery because he's now marrying another man's wife because the man's still alive. Anyway, I hope you've got that point. I know these are controversial topics and many of you may not agree with me, but the scriptures does actually say that. Okay, so continuing. Concubines. We saw in God's instructions there was no use of the word concubine, only woman. The Hebrew, HO2, or translated as wife. He also gave instructions regarding a man having more than one woman/wife in Deuteronomy 21 verse 15. Yet his instructions covered all women, whether single, betrothed or not, married and widowed. Also women captured in battle who became wives, not concubines. We see this in Deuteronomy chapters 21 verses 10 to 13. I'm going to take out this highlight because it may not come out very clearly on the video. 21:13. Note no mention of her mourning for a dead husband, but her mother and father. Again, according to, take out some of these highlights. Second, a bit better. Okay. According to Hebrew use of the word for wife, as I showed you, and concubine, get rid of this. The Hebrew word with the numerical number 6370 referring to the same person, it appears a concubine is a wife, but not the first or principal wife. Examples being 1 Chronicles chapters 1 verse 32. Now the sons of Keturah, Abraham's concubine. So I'm going to give some scriptures where the same person, in this case Abraham's wife, or Keturah, is going to be described as a wife in one verse and a concubine in another verse. It shows the same person and the same word. So the sons of Keturah, Abraham's concubines, she bare him Zipporah, blah blah blah. And in Genesis chapter 25 verse 1 it says, then again Abraham took a wife, and her name was Keturah. Another example is 1 Chronicles chapters 132 plus. Now the sons of Keturah, Abraham's concubine. So there you have Keturah being described, given two different descriptions. Genesis chapter 29 verse 9. And Laban gave to Rachel his daughter Bilhah, his handmaid, to be her maid, and she gave him Bilhah her handmaid to wife. And Jacob went in unto her. Later on it says, and it came to pass when Israel dwelt in that land that Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine. Same woman, given two different descriptions. And Israel heard it. Next one, Genesis 37 verse 2. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock of his brethren, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zipporah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought unto his father their evil report. I'm just going to pause there. Right, I'm not sure if you can see this, but here we have in my Bible, Judges chapters 19, the account there. And you see next to the word concubine, in verse 1, it has a little I next to it. And if you go in the margin where that reference is, so focus on that. Anyway, it should tell you that, no, it's not focusing, that the concubine and wife are one and the same thing. So if you get a good Bible, it will help you out there. Okay, so back to Judges chapters 8, verse 30, some more explanations. And Gideon had 70 sons of his body begotten, for he had many wives. And his concubine that was in Shechem, she also bare him a son, whose name he called Abimelech. And I said, remember, Gideon is a man chosen by God. We just read it in yesterday's study. So God has never said anything wrong about his men having two wives. In fact, here we see he actually used them with Abraham, with Ishmael and so on, with Jacob, with the 4 sons where 12 tribes of Israel came from, and here with Gideon, who went and rescued Israel. Continue from today's chapters 19 verse 1. And it came to pass in those days, when there was no king in Israel, that there was a certain Levite sojourning on the side of Mount Ephraim, who took to him a concubine out of Bethlehem, Judah. And his concubine played a whore against him, and went away from him unto his father's house. I think we did this, and there for a month. So here we read her actions of playing the whore is the same, as used for a wife that. So I think I'm repeating this myself here, because this was cut and pasted from another article. Okay, I think I've gone through. I'll just quickly run through this so I don't miss out anything. In the Strong's Concordance, the source of the meaning of the Hebrew word translated as concubine is uncertain. This is what it says, but they're associated with Palamore. I'll run through this. The E-sword, I just showed you the book of that. You can read it there. Though we may not like what the Bible teaches, either on the traditions or gender, you may agree it states a man can have and did have more than one wife. This is what I try to show you in the Bible, where it has this little mark here, and then if you go in the margin, that's what I was trying to show you there, that the Hebrew woman, concubine, wife is the same thing. In the battle that resulted from the actions of Judges 19, thousands of men were killed. We did that, 25,000, Benjamin, and slew 200 men. So I covered the reason why it is because many men die in battle, and God has to make sure those women are cared for. Either like Ruth, where they went and gleaned the fields to eat, or they go into next of kin of their husband's brother, their husband's relatives. And only when they don't have any relatives left that Israel takes care of them. We saw in the Philistines fought, and Israel was smitten, and they fled every man into his tent, and there was a great slaughter, for there fell of Israel 30,000 footmen. So men always falling, as I show you. In the case of David's concubines, just as in Judges 19 account, where the man is called a husband. In 2 Samuel 20 verse 3, the concubines are called widows. If you read the account of David when he had to flee from Saul, a term used for wives. 2 Samuel 20 verse 3, and David came to his house at Jerusalem, and the king took the 10 women, his concubines, whom he had left to keep the house, and put them inward, and fed them, but went not in unto them. So they were shut up unto the day of their death in widowhood. So they call concubines, also called widows. So whether you agree with the above or not, I try to only write the findings. You use information as you see fit. So that is the end of today's study. You can reflect on it yourself, and we'll continue tomorrow with our normal Genesis to Revelations studies to see what is relevant for salvation. Shalom.